work at a morgue. One night, a drowning victim asked me for water. It wasn't fear. It was something far worse. I don't know why people choose to work at a morgue. Actually, I do. I came here for the silence, not the kind you find in a library or an empty park at dawn, but the absolute final silence, the kind that comes when all questions are asked and all answers are given. Here, you don't need to hope. You don't need to struggle. You don't even need to feel. Everything is already over, and in that there is a strange, honest peace. My name is Igor. I'm 42, and I'm tired. Tired of a world where everyone constantly wants something, runs somewhere, proves something. My job is a night orderly. I receive those who have finished their run. My task is simple. Register, store, wait for morning. After 3 years, I've learned to appreciate this simplicity. The hum of old refrigeration units has become a lullaby to me. That night was like hundreds of others. Rain, occasional cars sliding over wet asphalt somewhere above. In another world, I was sitting in my small office, drinking cold tea, reading an old book. Around 1 a.m., they brought her in. 2 silent men from the transport service. Drowning victim from the river, unidentified. Standard procedure. I signed the forms, they left. I pulled the wet sheet off the stretcher. Young. About 25, maybe a little older. Dark hair plastered to her forehead, dressed in a simple cotton dress. Her pale face, no fear, no pain, only surprise, as if she had asked a question and didn't get an answer. I worked automatically. Tag on the ankle, entry in the log, number 7. I didn't look at her as a person. She was a body, an object, an inventory item. It was easier that way. I wheeled the stretcher into the cold room, opened locker 7, cold, sterile air. I transferred her, closed the heavy steel door. The click of the lock sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. That was it. I returned to my tea, but I couldn't read. Her face kept flashing in my mind. That silly, childlike surprise. I got angry at myself. I couldn't let it in. I couldn't. Otherwise, all my silence would crumble to dust. I forced myself back into the book. An hour passed. The rain stopped, and in the quiet, I heard it. A soft knock, like someone tapping a finger on metal. One tap, and silence. I froze. Old compressor? The building settling? Anything. I sat motionless, becoming nothing but hearing. 1 minute, 2, nothing. I exhaled. It was nothing. Then again. Knock, knock, knock. More insistent this time. From the cold room. Locker 7. It wasn't fear. Fear is when you worry for your life. I wasn't afraid. It was something else. A disturbance in order. A glitch in the system where glitches shouldn't exist. Someone was breaking my silence. I slowly stood up, picked up a heavy bunch of keys from the table, just to have something in my hand. I walked to the door and pushed it open. The dim light of a single lamp revealed rows of steel doors in the shadows, all closed. I walked along the row. First door, second, third, 7th. The door was locked, but as I stared at it, I felt the knock again, right under my hand, a faint vibration. My mind refused to accept it. Maybe a post-mortem muscle spasm. Gases. I'd heard of that, but so rhythmic. I inserted the key, turned it. The lock clicked. I pulled the door open. She was lying just as I left her. On her back, arms at her sides, but her eyes were open. She was staring at the ceiling, and while I watched, she slowly, with visible effort, turned her head and looked at me. There was nothing in her eyes, no life, no death, only water. It was as if the entire river, its dark, cold depth, was reflected in them. Then she spoke. Her lips barely moved, and the sound was no louder than dry grass brushing in the wind. But in the morgue silence, it sounded like a scream. Drink. One word. And at that moment, my carefully built wall collapsed. All my silence, all my peace, all my armor of cynicism and indifference shattered, because in front of me was not a corpse, nor a living person. It was someone's thirst. The last, desperate, unquenchable thirst. I didn't think. I just went back to my office, poured water from the kettle into a chipped mug. My hands didn't shake. I was completely calm. The calm of someone falling from a great height, knowing the ground is very close. I returned to her, lifted her head. She was heavy and cold, like a wet stone. I held the mug to her lips. She drank. Small, greedy sips, spilling water over herself. I watched as it ran down her chin, her neck, lost in the wet collar of her dress. She drank it all, to the last drop. When I removed the mug, she closed her eyes. Just closed them, like a tired person. Her head rested on my hand. I carefully laid her back on the cold metal. And that was it. She no longer moved, no longer breathed. She was once again a body, an object, an inventory item. But something had changed. I looked at her face. The surprise was gone. In its place was calm. The kind of calm belonging to someone who has waited a long time. And finally, it was answered. I stood by her until morning. I didn't think about anything. I just watched and listened. But it was a different silence, no longer empty. Something fragile appeared in it, barely noticeable, like the echo of the last sip of water. In the morning, my replacement arrived. "How was your night, Igor? Calm?" I looked at her, then at the closed door of locker 7. Yes, surprisingly calm. I stepped outside. The sun blinded me. The world was noisy, running, alive. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't want to hide from it. I don't know what it was. I'll never know. But I do know one thing. Sometimes, to bring someone back to life, you just need to give them water. Even if they are already dead. Especially if they are already dead. She regained consciousness in complete darkness, not immediately understanding where she was or what was happening to her. The air around her was stale and heavy. Every breath required effort, while the tight space pressed in from all sides, leaving no sense of movement or escape. Silence surrounded her, dense and absolute, as if the world beyond this place had ceased to exist. At first came unease, followed by fear, and only then the instinctive attempt to breathe more deeply and make sense of the situation. The realization arrived suddenly and without mercy. She was inside a coffin, not as a symbol, not as a nightmare, but in the most literal sense, buried underground. The woman, officially declared dead, woke up 7 days after her own funeral. What initially seemed impossible soon shocked her family, then the entire town, and eventually people far beyond it. This took place in Brazil, in a small village in the state of Bahia, where medical care is often limited to quick examinations and rushed conclusions. 37-year-old Rosângela Almeida dos Santos suddenly felt unwell. Severe seizures began, and within minutes she lost consciousness. Her relatives immediately called a local paramedic, He examined the woman, found no signs of life, and pronounced death caused by a heart attack. No further tests were performed, and the decision was made without hesitation. The death was officially registered, a certificate was issued, and the body was transferred to the morgue. The following day, the funeral took place. Family members, neighbors, and a local priest gathered to say goodbye. The coffin was lowered into the ground, the grave was filled, and a cross was placed above it. Rosangela was laid to rest, and everyone believed it was forever. A week passed. Rosangela's family tried to process the tragedy and slowly return to ordinary life, as much as that was possible. Then, one day, strange sounds were heard near the cemetery. Dull knocking noises and muffled cries, as if they were coming from beneath the ground. At first, no one paid much attention. Some thought it was imagination, others blamed echoes or distant noise. But the next day, relatives came to the grave themselves and heard the same sounds. After that, the police were called, and the grave was opened. When the coffin was lifted to the surface, it became clear that something disturbing had happened inside. The inner side of the lid was deeply scratched. Rosangela's fingernails were broken and stained with blood. Her body was positioned unnaturally, as if she had been desperately trying to escape. At first, vandalism was considered. However, one of the neighbors admitted that he had heard screams as early as the third day after the burial. After that, it became clear that the situation was far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. When the coffin was opened, Rosangela's body was still warm. Paramedics detected a faint heartbeat and rushed her to the hospital. Doctors could not explain how she had survived for so long without water, food, or fresh air. When she regained consciousness, Rosangela spoke only one sentence. I screamed, but no one heard me. Later, doctors determined that she suffered from a rare condition known as catalepsy. In this state, a person appears completely dead. Breathing is barely noticeable. The pulse is extremely weak, and the body remains motionless, while consciousness may still be present. Rosangela survived, but the consequences were severe. Prolonged oxygen deprivation caused irreversible damage. She lost the ability to speak and move normally. Her family filed a lawsuit against the medical authorities. Several professionals were temporarily suspended. The case sparked widespread public attention. The reactions within the family were divided. Her husband filed for divorce, stating that he could not live beside someone he had already buried. Her mother stayed with her, calling her a gift from above. Consciousness did not return in a rush, but in a slow, heavy tide. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Damp earth, cheap synthetic satin, something sweet and woody. Then came the awareness of my body. I was lying on my back, my hands folded over my chest. It was tight. Not tight like a crowded subway car, but completely, absolutely tight. My shoulders pressed against the walls, and my nose almost touched something soft and fabric-covered above me. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air was stale and thick, like cotton. The survival instinct, that ancient animal buried deep in the brain, screamed. I jerked and threw my arms upward. My fist struck the lid with a dull thud. The boards answered with a dense, flat sound, a sound without echo. I was in a box, underground. Panic was a luxury I could not afford. Panic burns oxygen, and there was only enough here for hours, maybe minutes. I forced myself to go still. I needed to assess the situation. I couldn't remember how I got here. last memory was an evening run in the park, a prick in my neck, darkness, cheap thriller material. Except now it was my reality. Something hard pressed into my thigh. My phone. They hadn't taken my phone. That was hope. With difficulty, I bent my arm and pulled the phone out. I pressed the power button. The screen flared. No signal. Of course. 6 feet of soil makes excellent insulation. Battery, 1%. A red line, thin as a hair. My life measured in milliampere hours. I turned the screen off and listened. At first, there was only silence. The crushing silence of a grave. I could hear my own heart. Then I heard it. A quiet, rhythmic, wet sound from the left. Crunch, pause, crunch. I turned the screen on again, dimmed it with my palm, and pressed my ear to the wall. Crunch, scrape, not mice. This was the sound of countless tiny jaws chewing into cheap pine. They sensed warmth. They sensed organic matter, 1%. The air was thinning. My thoughts grew sluggish. I unlocked the phone. There were no icons, only one app, a black square. I tapped it. The screen went black. White text appeared. Cycle 4 status. Critical biometrics. Extreme stress. Below it was a button. Confirm awareness. The sound intensified. Crunch, crunch. And then I remembered. The clinic, the contract, the experiment. This wasn't a kidnapping. It was therapy. The phone blinked. 1%. The insects were right next to my ear. I felt the vibration in the wood. This was a test, not of strength, but of clarity under absolute despair. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I stopped fighting the coffin. I accepted it. I raised my finger to the button. The wood cracked. Dirt spilled through the gap. Something cold and wet brushed my cheek. I pressed the button. The phone went dark. I was left in total darkness, with soil falling onto my face and the sound of hundreds of tiny jaws. A minute passed, then another. My lungs burned. Then I heard a different sound. From above, thud, thud, a shovel. Someone was digging, fast, professional. The pressure eased. A mechanism whirred. The lid was torn away. Blinding surgical lights, fresh air. Strong hands pulled me out. I lay on a metal gurney, gasping. People in white coats surrounded me. The doctor with cold eyes stepped closer. Cycle 4 complete. Patient confirmed awareness. Neural activity stable. Disease regression halted. He looked at me. Welcome back to the world of the living. You passed. I looked at the box. It wasn't a coffin. It was a high-tech capsule designed to mimic wood. A hole gaped in the side, filled with peat and specially bred insects. I had been in hell. I got out, and I was cured. For the first time in that endless hour, I simply allowed myself to breathe.